I rode into Cedar Ridge for three things: coffee, salt, and flour. Simple as that. The mountain doesn't ask for much, but it takes its due, and a man can't live on venison and scenery alone. For 3 months, I hadn't seen another soul, and that was just the way I liked it. The town was a necessary evil, a place of noise and judgment I'd left behind 6 years ago, right after I buried Sarah. Her memory was the only company I kept, and she was quiet, which suited me fine. The air smelled of pine and the coming snow, a clean, sharp scent that usually cleared my head. But today something was off. The town square, usually just a muddy patch of nothing, was crowded. Men were gathered, their voices a low rumble of curiosity and something uglier. I planned to ride right on by, get my supplies from the general store, and be back on the trail before sundown. My horse, Samson, had other ideas. He slowed, sensing the tension in my grip on the reins, his ears twitching toward the commotion. And that's when I heard the voice, sharp and oily like a rusty hinge. "Come on, gentlemen. A fine specimen, strong as an ox and twice as useful." I looked over. It was Howard Briggs, a man who'd sell his own mother for a profit, standing on a makeshift stage of planks and barrels. And beside him stood a person with a rough grain sack pulled over their head, hands bound tight in front of them. It was a woman, I could tell by the shape of her, tall and straight, despite the humiliation of her posture. The crowd shuffled. Some laughed, a nervous, nasty sound. Others just stared. This wasn't right. It wasn't a cattle auction. It was something far worse. Briggs was trying to sell a human being. "Can't say she's a beauty," Briggs cackled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from her worn boots. "Previous owner insisted on the sack, said it was for the best. But I guarantee she'll work from sunup to sundown and never complain." "Then why the sack, Briggs?" someone yelled. "If she's such a good worker, let's see what we're buying." "Terms of the sale, gentlemen. Terms of the sale," Briggs shot back a little too quickly. "You ain't buying her for her conversation or her pretty face, trust me. You're buying a strong back and a quiet mouth. What more could a man want?" The laughter that followed turned my stomach. I'd seen ugly things in my life. I'd fought bears, survived blizzards, and buried my own wife. But this was a different kind of cold. It was the coldness of men who'd forgotten their own humanity. I started to pull Samson's head around, ready to leave this whole rotten scene behind. I had my own ghosts. I didn't need to take on anyone else's. But then I saw it, the smallest of movements. The woman under the sack, she squared her shoulders, her bound hands clenched into fists, the knuckles showing white through the dirt. It was a flicker of defiance in a bonfire of shame, a single spark of fight in a world trying to grind her into dust. And in that moment, something in me, something I thought had died with Sarah, broke loose. $5, someone shouted, more as a joke than a real offer. Briggs scoffed. 20, another man slurred, nudging his friend. The bidding was a joke, a cruel game to pass the afternoon. Each bid was another layer of humiliation heaped on the silent figure on the stage. The woman flinched with every laugh, every jeer. I could feel her silent screams from across the square. I watched as decent men, men I knew to have wives and daughters, either joined the cruel sport or turned their backs, pretending not to see. Samuel Morrison, the blacksmith, a good man, he tried to intervene. "This ain't right, Briggs," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're a long way from proper." Briggs just waved a piece of paper in the air. "Got the bill of sale right here, Samuel. All legal. She's property, plain and simple. Now, do I hear a real bid, or am I taking her to the next town where men appreciate a bargain?" The crowd started to thin. The sport was over. The woman on the platform swayed, and I wondered how long she'd been standing there, under the hot sun, under the weight of all those eyes. "Going once," Briggs called, desperation in his voice now. "Going twice. For $2 to the drunk in the back." The words came out of my mouth before I even knew I was thinking them. They were rough, torn from a throat that hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in months. $10. The square went dead silent. Every head turned to look at me. The mountain man, Jed Halverson. the ghost who only came to town for supplies. They looked at me like I just sprouted a second head. Briggs's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. Greed and relief washed over his face in a greasy wave. $10 from Mr. Halverson. Now that's a respectable bid. Do I hear 15? Do I hear 12? Silence. Just the wind whistling through the alleyways and the collective shock of the town. No one was going to bid against the quiet giant who lived alone in the high peaks. They were too scared, or maybe, just maybe, a little too ashamed. Sold! Briggs slammed his fist on an invisible gavel. To Jed Halverson for $10. Come and collect your property, sir. Property. The word made me want to spit. I swung down from Samson, my legs stiff. I walked through the parted crowd, feeling their eyes on my back. I pulled the worn bills from my pocket, most of the money I had for the season's supplies, and climbed the rickety steps. Up close, I could see the woman trembling. Not from fear, I realized, but from rage. She stood tall, nearly as tall as me, and that small gesture of squaring her shoulders hadn't been a fluke. She was a fighter. Briggs shoved the bill of sale into my hand. She's all yours, Halverson. Good luck. You're gonna need it. He leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey and lies. A word of advice, he whispered. Keep the sack on till you're well clear of town. Trust me, it's for the best. I ignored him. I turned to the woman. Ma'am, I said, my voice still feeling strange in my own ears. We're leaving. I reached to take her elbow, to guide her down the steps. She jerked back, a sharp, violent movement. Then, after a long, tense moment, she did something that surprised me. She held out her bound wrist to me. The message was crystal clear. She would come, but not as cattle being led. She was choosing to walk with me, and I respected that. I pulled out my hunting knife and sawed through the thick rope. The skin underneath was raw and bleeding. We walked down the steps together, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. I helped her onto Samson's back, then swung up behind her. She sat as stiff as a board, her back pressed against my chest. I had to put my arms around her to hold the reins, and I could feel the tension vibrating through her entire body. As we rode out of Cedar Ridge, leaving the whispers and stares behind, Briggs yelled one last thing. Remember, Halverson, no returns. She's your problem now. The trail leading up my mountain is steep and unforgiving. It winds through thick pine and aspen groves, a path I know better than the lines on my own hand. For the first hour, neither of us said a word. The only sounds were Samson's steady hoofbeats on the rocky ground and the sigh of the wind through the trees. The woman in front of me hadn't moved a muscle. She was a statue carved from stone, so rigid I started to worry she'd stop breathing. But with every mile we put between us and that town, I felt the slightest change. The iron-hard line of her shoulders began to soften, just a fraction. The frantic, trapped energy that had radiated from her on that platform started to fade, replaced by a deep, weary stillness. The sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The air grew colder, and I could feel a slight shiver run through her. It was then that she finally spoke. Her voice was muffled by the sack, but it was clear and low, with no hint of fear. Why? Just that one word. It hung in the air between us, heavy with all the things she wasn't asking. Why me? Why did you interfere? What do you want? I thought about it for a long while as Samson picked his way across a shallow creek. Why had I done it? I could have just bought my flour and coffee and been back in my own solitary world. I could have let some other man deal with her, or let Briggs drag her to the next town to suffer the same fate all over again. It wasn't my business. I'd made a point of making nothing my business for 6 long years, but seeing her stand there, defiant even in utter humiliation, had struck a chord deep inside me. It reminded me of a hawk I once saw with a broken wing, fighting off a coyote to the very last. It was spirit, and spirit was something I hadn't seen in a long, long time. Didn't seem right, I said finally, the words feeling inadequate. No one deserves to be treated like that. She was quiet for so long I thought the conversation was over. The woods grew darker around us, the shadows deepening into pools of black. A wolf howled in the distance, a lonely, haunting sound that usually made my skin prickle. The woman didn't even flinch. If anything, she seemed to relax even more, as if the wild was a safer place than the world of men we'd left behind. Then she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. Then you don't know what you've bought. Didn't buy anything, I corrected her, my voice firm. I just paid to get you out of that damn circus. Another long silence. The moon was rising now, a sliver of silver that cast a pale light on the trail ahead. Thank you, she said, so softly I almost missed it. We rode on. I found myself wondering what kind of story was hidden beneath that coarse burlap sack. What had a woman done to end up on an auction block in a town like Cedar Ridge? What horrors had she seen? But questions could wait. For now it was enough to have gotten her away. Whatever she was, whatever she'd done, she was a human soul, and that was more than anyone in that town square had seen. After another 2 hours, the familiar shape of my cabin appeared in a clearing. It wasn't much, just a single room of logs I'd cut and placed myself, with a stone chimney and a sturdy roof. To most people it would look like a lonely, desolate place. To me it was home. It was peace. We're here, I said. She stirred, her head tilting, as if trying to see through the fabric. I slid off Samson first, my boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. I reached up to help her down. This time she didn't pull away. She let me take her waist and swing her to the ground, though her legs were stiff and she stumbled slightly. I steadied her with a hand on her arm, and for a moment I could feel the fine tremble that still ran through her. I led her to the door and fumbled with the wooden latch. Inside it was cold and dark. I lit the kerosene lamp on the table, and a warm, yellow light filled the small space. It was a simple room, a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves filled with jars of preserves, and my rifle mounted over the hearth. It was neat, orderly, the way a man with nothing but time on his hands keeps things. The woman stood just inside the door, her hooded head turning slowly, taking in the room. You can sit, I said, gesturing to one of the chairs. I'll get a fire going. She moved to the table with a strange, careful grace and sat down, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I busied myself with the fire, coaxing the kindling to life until flames licked up the logs in the hearth. The warmth began to spread, chasing the chill from the air. I filled a tin cup with fresh water from the bucket by the door and set it on the table in front of her. You must be thirsty, I said. She reached for the cup, then her hand stopped in midair. She couldn't drink with the sack on. Of course. I can take that off for you, I said gently, if you'll let me. She didn't move for a full minute. I could almost hear the war going on inside her head. Trust versus fear, hope versus a lifetime of hurt. Finally, she gave a single, sharp nod. I walked around behind her chair. My fingers, clumsy from years of trapping and splitting wood, worked at the rough twine tied around her neck. I was careful not to pull her hair. The knot gave way. The twine fell loose, and I lifted the heavy grain sack. The lamplight fell on her face, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't what I was expecting. Based on Briggs's words, the crowd's reaction, I'd prepared myself for something difficult, a disfigurement, a face twisted by disease or injury. But that wasn't it. Not at all. Her features were strong, not delicate. High cheekbones, a straight nose, a firm jaw that spoke of stubbornness. Her hair was a dark auburn, shot through with threads of silver, and it had been hacked off short and uneven, as if with a dull knife. But it was her eyes that held me captive. One was a deep, warm brown, the color of rich earth after a spring rain. The other was a startling, pale green, like ice on a frozen lake in winter. And running from her left temple, down across that sharp cheekbone, was a scar. It was old and white, not a fresh wound, but it was a testament to some past violence, a permanent mark of a story I didn't know. She wasn't homely, she wasn't ugly. She was magnificent, like a mountain peak that had been weathered by 1,000 storms. Her face was a map of survival, and it was the most striking, unforgettable face I had ever seen. Now I understood. They hadn't put the sack on her because she was hideous. They'd put it on because she was memorable. Her face wasn't one a man could easily forget or easily dismiss. It was a face that demanded you look, that made you ask questions. And men like the ones in that town, They don't like questions. They like things simple, easy to categorize. This woman was anything but. She watched me, her gaze steady, her mismatched eyes searching my face for the reaction she was so clearly used to seeing. Disgust, pity, fear. I offered her none of those. I simply pushed the tin cup of water a little closer to her. The water's fresh, I said, my voice even. Brought it up from the spring this morning. A flicker of something, was it surprise or crossed her features? She picked up the cup with hands that trembled just slightly and drank, her throat working as she emptied it in 3 long swallows. Are you hungry? I asked. I've got stew. I can warm it up. I... Her voice was a dry rasp, rough from disuse. She cleared her throat and tried again. I don't want to be a trouble. No trouble, I said, turning to the hearth. I was going to eat anyway. I ladled some of the cold venison stew into a pot and hung it over the fire. The simple act of preparing a meal gave my hands something to do while my mind tried to catch up with the day's events. Just this morning, I was a solitary man living a quiet life. Now there was a woman with eyes like the earth and the sky sitting at my table. My name is Mara, she said suddenly, her voice stronger now. Just Mara. I don't have a family name worth claiming anymore. Jed Halverson, I replied, though I figured she already knew that from the auction. Been up here 6 years. Alone? She asked. Alone, I confirmed, not offering any more. The story of Sarah was mine, not something to be shared with a stranger. Not yet. And now, she said, her voice laced with a bitter irony, you have me. What am I to you, Mr. Halverson? You paid $10. You have a paper that says you own me. I took the stew off the fire and turned to face her, meeting that incredible dual-colored gaze head-on. As far as I'm concerned, I said slowly, you're a guest who needed a hand out of a bad spot. Nothing more. Guests are free to leave whenever they please. That includes you. I let the words sink in. When morning comes, if you want to leave, I'll give you what supplies I can spare and point you toward the nearest town that isn't Cedar Ridge. That piece of paper Briggs gave me, we can use it to start the fire right now if you like. She just stared at me, her expression a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. She was looking for the angle, the trick. In her world, kindness probably always came with a price. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you do that? $10 isn't nothing to a man who lives like this. Money's just money, I shrugged. You can always trap more furs, pan more gold. You can't always live with yourself if you stand by and do nothing while something wrong is happening right in front of you. I ladled the stew into 2 wooden bowls and set one in front of her with a spoon. She looked down at the steaming food like it was a mirage that might vanish. Go on, I urged gently. It's not fancy, but it's hot and it'll fill your belly. She ate. At first she took small, hesitant bites, but then a deeper, more ravenous hunger took over, and she began to eat quickly, methodically. I realized she probably hadn't had a real meal in days, maybe weeks. I ate my own stew quietly, pretending to be focused on the fire, giving her the dignity of not being watched. When her bowl was empty, I stood up and refilled it without a word. The second time, she ate more slowly, savoring each spoonful. I know what they told you, she said, her eyes fixed on her bowl, that I'm difficult, peculiar, unfit for a decent household. Men in town say a lot of things, I replied. Doesn't make any of them true. Sometimes it does, she said, finally looking up at me. Her gaze was so intense it was like being physically struck. I fought back. That was my crime. The man before, he thought buying my father's debt meant he bought my soul. I refused to let him own me. Her voice was low and fierce, like a cornered animal. So they called me wild. They called me unmanageable. They put a sack over my head and sold me like a lame horse to teach other women what happens when you have too much pride. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the heavy silence. I understood now. The scar, the cropped hair, the defiance in her eyes. They were all pieces of the same story, a story of a woman who refused to be broken. Sounds to me, I said finally, like you've got courage and a strong spine. I don't see a single thing wrong with either of those. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was a small, fragile thing, but it transformed her face, softening the harsh lines and making her strange eyes shine in the lamplight. You are either a very kind man, Mr. Halverson, she said, or a very foolish one. I've been called both in my time, I admitted. Truth's probably somewhere in the middle. I stood and collected our empty bowls. You can have the bed. I'll make a pallet by the fire. I couldn't possibly, she started to protest. You can, and you will, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. You've had a long day. You need a real night's sleep. She rose from the table and walked toward the simple bed in the corner. Then she stopped and turned back to me, a new fear in her eyes. The man who owned me before, she said, her voice dropping. Garrett Walsh. He's not the kind of man who lets go of his property. Even if he threw it away, he won't want anyone else to have it. He'll come looking for me. A cold anger settled in my gut. I looked around my small, sturdy cabin. I looked at the rifle over the mantel. Let him come, I said, and my voice was quiet, but it held the hardness of mountain granite. This is my land. This is my home. No one takes anything from me here. That first week passed in a quiet, careful dance. Mara was the first one up each morning, moving around the cabin with the silence of a cat. She insisted on earning her keep, and I soon discovered she was a miracle worker. She cooked meals that made my simple supplies taste like a feast. She mended my worn-out shirts with stitches so fine you could barely see them. She organized my chaotic shelves until everything was in its proper place. But she never acted like a servant. She worked like a partner, seeing a need and filling it, her hands always busy, her mind always working. The cabin, which had been my silent refuge for 6 years, started to feel different. The silence was no longer empty. It was comfortable. It was filled with the soft sounds of her presence. The rhythmic chop of a knife against a wooden board, the whisper of a needle through cloth, the soft tread of her boots on the floor. It felt less lonely. I found myself talking more, not much, but more than I had in years. I'd point out a hawk circling overhead or explain which plants were good for medicine. She was a good listener, her striking eyes watching me, taking everything in. It was on the 8th night, as a cold rain drummed against the roof, that she finally told me the whole story. We were sitting by the fire, the way we did every evening. I was oiling one of my traps, and she was darning a pair of my wool socks. The scene was so domestic, so peaceful, it felt like a lifetime away from the auction block in Cedar Ridge. His name was Garrett Walsh, she said suddenly, her eyes still on her needlework. My father was a fool for cards. He gambled away everything we had, and then he gambled on credit from Walsh. When the debt came due, Walsh offered him a deal. She paused, and her next words were laced with venom. He offered to cancel the debt in exchange for me. Not as a wife. He wouldn't honor me with that title. I was to be his housekeeper, his indentured servant, for 7 years. My hands stilled on the cold steel of the trap. I didn't say anything, just let her talk. I tried, she went on, her voice low and steady. For 2 years I ran his house, I managed his staff, I cooked his meals. I did everything he asked, but it was never enough. He didn't just want my labor, he wanted me to be grateful for it. He wanted me to bow and scrape and thank him for the roof over my head. He wanted to own my spirit. Her hand unconsciously went to the scar on her cheek. One morning I accidentally burned his breakfast. He demanded I get on my knees and beg his forgiveness. I refused. A harsh, humorless laugh escaped her lips. He used the back of his hand. The ring he wore, it cut me deep. He said he would teach me humility. Instead, he taught me to fight. So you fought back, I said quietly. I did, she confirmed, a flicker of pride in her voice. I threw the entire pot of hot coffee right in his face, and I ran. I made it for 3 days in the wilderness before his men hunted me down. He didn't kill me. That would have been too simple, and it might have brought the law snooping around. He was smarter than that. He decided to destroy me instead. Her needle stitched in and out of the sock, a steady rhythmic motion. He spread rumors. He told everyone I was insane, that I was dangerous. He pointed to my eyes and called them the mark of a witch. He told people I had tried to poison him. In a small, God-fearing community, those words are a death sentence. No one would help me. No one would even speak to me. I was an outcast. He finally got tired of the game, she finished, setting down the sock and finally meeting my gaze across the flickering firelight. He decided to get rid of me for good. He sold my contract to Howard Briggs with the condition that I be sold far away, where I could never trouble him again. That's what you bought, Jed Halverson? A madwoman, a witch, a dangerous runaway with a price on her head. I looked at her, sitting there in the warm light of my fire. I saw the scar, the haunted look in her eyes, the strength in her hands. I saw everything she had survived. What I see, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, is a woman who refused to let a cruel man crush her. There's nothing mad about that. And as for being dangerous, I allowed a small smile. Well, I figure a little danger just keeps a man on his toes. She stared at me, her mask of cynical hardness cracking just a little. You're not afraid of him? Of what people will say? Mara, I said, leaning back in my chair. I live on a mountain by myself. What other people think stopped mattering to me a long time ago. Besides, I added, I've known real dangerous men. They don't warn you first, and they sure as hell don't sit by the fire quietly darning socks. A small blush crept up her neck, and I pressed my advantage. I also saw you sneaking half your biscuits out to that scrawny fox that's been hanging around the woodpile. A woman with a soft spot for hungry creatures isn't the monster you think you are. For only the second time since I'd met her, she smiled. It was a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and lit them both up, brown and green, until they shone like jewels. The transformation was breathtaking. You're mocking me, she said, but there was no heat in it. Maybe a little, I admitted, but I mean what I say. You're safe here, Mara, for as long as you want to stay. Her smile faded and the haunted look returned. That's the problem, Jed. I can't ever be truly safe. He made sure of that. I waited, patient as the mountain itself. I knew there was more. I have a sister, she whispered, and the words were torn from a place of deep, raw pain. Her name is Eliza. She's only 17. When I ran, Walsh kept her. He calls her his insurance. He knows that as long as he has her, I'll never go to the law. I'll never tell the full story. He has her trapped. The fire popped, spitting an ember onto the hearthstone. She's not like me, Mara continued, her voice thick with tears she refused to shed. She's gentle, trusting. The world breaks people like her without even trying. Walsh tells everyone she's simple-minded and needs his protection. And Eliza, she's starting to believe him. She thinks she's weak, that she can't survive without him. Her composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, glittering in the firelight. I abandoned her, Jed. To save myself, I left my little sister in the hands of a monster. You didn't abandon her, I said, my voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. You survived, so you could fight for her another day. Those are just words, she choked out. Every night I sleep in a warm bed. She's in that house. Every meal I eat, I wonder if he's letting her go hungry. My freedom is built on her prison. The weight of her confession settled in the small cabin, heavier than any winter snow. I finally understood the true nature of the chains that bound her. It wasn't a piece of paper. It was love and guilt, twisted together into a knot that was strangling her. And in that moment, a decision formed in my mind, as solid and clear as the stars outside. We'll get her out, I said simply. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? Your sister, I repeated. We're going to get her back. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but we'll do it. You don't understand, she said, shaking her head. Walsh has money, he has men, he has influence. You're one man on a mountain. It's impossible. I've got more than that, I told her, leaning forward, my gaze locked on hers. I know this land better than any man he can hire. I have friends in these mountains who owe me favors. And most importantly, I said, I now have someone who knows his house, his habits, his weaknesses. That's a powerful weapon. But why? She asked, the question raw and desperate. Why would you risk everything for a stranger? For her? I thought for a moment, thought about the long, empty years since Sarah died. The silence, the loneliness I pretended was peace. 6 years ago, I lost my wife to a fever, I said, the words tasting like rust. I couldn't do anything but watch her fade away. I've spent every day since telling myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need anyone. Maybe I was right, but sitting here tonight, listening to you, I'm starting to think God didn't put me on that street in Cedar Ridge by accident. I don't believe in God anymore, she whispered. You don't have to, I said. You just have to believe that two people fighting together have a better chance than one person fighting alone. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw past the survivor, past the fighter, and saw the terrified woman underneath. And in her eyes I saw a tiny flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Hope. I'm ready, she said, her voice barely audible, but as strong as steel, and I believed her. Outside, the rain stopped. The first snowflakes of the season began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the world in a clean, pure white. A change was coming. A storm was brewing, and we were going to walk right into the heart of it, together. The snow fell for 2 straight days, a thick, silent curtain that cut the cabin off from the rest of the world. It was a peaceful time. We planned, we talked. Mara drew maps of Walsh's ranch from memory, marking guard patrols, weak spots in the fences, the layout of the main house. A new energy coursed through her. Hope had given her a purpose beyond mere survival. I was outside splitting the last of a downed pine when I heard them. Horses. Not one, but several, moving steadily up the trail. I grabbed my rifle from where it leaned against the cabin wall just as Mara opened the door, her face pale with alarm. 3 riders broke through the trees into the clearing. The man in the lead wore a tin star on his heavy coat, a federal marshal. The 2 men flanking him were deputies, their hands resting too casually on the butts of their pistols. Jed Halverson? The marshal called out, his voice carrying easily in the still cold air. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. That's me, I said, keeping the rifle pointed at the ground, but ready. Something I can help you with, Marshal. Name's Brennan. Federal Marshal Roy Brennan, he said. I'm here on official business. I have a warrant concerning a woman known as Mara, a runaway indentured servant, property of Mr. Garrett Walsh. Mara stepped out onto the porch, her chin held high. She'd had just enough time to school her features into a mask of cold defiance. I'm Mara, she said, her voice clear and strong, and I'm no one's property. I'm a guest in this house. Brennan's gaze swept over her, the hacked-off hair, the scar, the mismatched eyes. His expression gave nothing away. Ma'am, Mr. Walsh has filed charges, breach of contract, and theft. Theft? I snorted. What did she supposedly steal? According to the complaint, Brennan said, pulling a document from his coat, a silver hairbrush, a pearl necklace, and other personal effects, valued at $50. They were gifts. Mara's voice was sharp as broken glass. From Mrs. Walsh before she passed away. They were my friends. I have letters from her to prove it. And where are these letters, ma'am? Brennan asked, his tone maddeningly neutral. In my old room. At the ranch, she admitted, her shoulders slumping slightly. If Walsh hasn't already burned them. The marshal sighed, a weary sound. He looked like a man who'd seen too much of the law's ugly side. Look, folks, I don't much like this. But a contract is a contract, and a warrant is a warrant. Territorial law is clear on debt bondage. My orders are to return the woman to Mr. Walsh's custody. You'd take me back to him? Mara asked, her voice trembling with a rage she was barely holding in check. You'd hand me back to that monster? My job is to enforce the law, ma'am, not to judge it, Brennan said, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of distaste in his eyes. There's another option, Mara said suddenly, her mind clearly racing. She stepped down from the porch, planting herself in the snow directly in front of Brennan's horse, forcing him to look down at her. You're a federal marshal. That means you answer to a higher law than some local contract. I want to give a sworn statement. I want to tell you for the official record everything that Garrett Walsh has done. Not just to me, but to the other women on that ranch, to my sister. One of the deputies, a younger man with kind eyes, shifted in his saddle. Marshal, maybe we should— Quiet, Morrison, Brennan snapped, but his eyes never left Mara. He studied her for a long, silent moment, the snow falling softly around them. I could see the struggle on his face, the law against his conscience. All right, he said finally, swinging down from his horse. Let's go inside. Out of this cold. Morrison, you'll take down her statement, word for word. The cabin felt small and crowded with the four of us inside. Mara stood by the hearth, her back straight as a poker, and she began to speak. She told them everything. She spoke not with emotion, but with a cold, clear precision that was more chilling than any tears. She detailed 2 years of abuse, of starvation used as punishment, of beatings disguised as accidents. She named names, foremen who were complicit, doctors who were paid to stay silent. And when she spoke of Eliza, her voice finally broke. He's holding a 17-year-old girl hostage, Marshal. He tells people she's simple, but he's just breaking her spirit day by day, using her to keep me silent. I've seen the bruises on her arms. I know what he is. I know what he's capable of. When she finished, the silence in the cabin was absolute. Deputy Morrison's pencil had stopped moving long ago. His face was ashen. Marshal Brennan stared at the rough wooden table as if the answers were carved into its grain. These are terrible accusations, ma'am, he said at last, his voice low. Can anyone else back up this story? Jacob Henley, Mara said immediately. He was a ranch hand, a good man. He quit because he couldn't stomach Walsh's cruelty. Last I heard, he was working 100 miles south. And Sarah Morrison, the cook, she saw everything. But she died last winter. Walsh said it was pneumonia. At the name Morrison, the young deputy flinched. Brennan shot him a sharp look. Sarah Morrison. She was your mother, wasn't she, deputy? The young man nodded, unable to speak, his face a mask of grief and sudden, dawning horror. Brennan stood up slowly, his decision made. He walked over to the fireplace and looked at the notes Deputy Morrison had taken. Then he looked at Mara and then at me. My official report will state that I tracked the fugitive to this location, he said, his voice ringing with authority. But upon arrival, I found no runaway. All I found was Mr. Jed Halverson and his wife, Mara Halverson, living peacefully on their own land. My jaw must have dropped. Morrison stared at his boss, his mouth agape. Wife? Mara whispered. Deputy, Brennan said, turning to the young man, did you get any of that unsubstantiated testimony in your notes? Morrison looked down at the pages filled with his handwriting. Then with a decisive rip, he tore them from his notebook, crumpled them into a tight ball, and tossed them into the fire. What testimony, sir? He asked, his voice clear. I didn't hear a thing. Good man, Brennan said with a grim nod. He turned back to us. A word of advice. Under the law, a husband assumes his wife's debts and contracts, but a man like Walsh can't legally force another man's wife into servitude. A marriage certificate, properly filed, would protect you in a way nothing else can. The implication was clear. He was offering us a way out, a lie to fight a lie. As for your sister, Brennan continued, his face hardening, I'll be passing by the Double Bar Ranch on my way back to the capital. I think I'll make an official inquiry into the welfare of all persons residing there. Sometimes just the sight of a federal badge is enough to make a man like Walsh reconsider his actions. He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the latch. He looked straight at me. He won't let this go, Halverson. When he finds out you've outmaneuvered him, he'll come at you another way. Not with the law. Watch your back. He and his deputy left, disappearing into the swirling snow. Mara sank into a chair, her body trembling now that the danger had passed. Married, she breathed, the word sounding foreign and strange. He said, married. I knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in mine. It can be just words on a piece of paper, Mara. A legal fiction to keep you safe. That's all it has to be. She looked up at me, her mismatched eyes searching my face. You would do that? Tie yourself to me? A woman you barely know? A woman with a storm of trouble following her? I know enough, I said quietly. I know you're brave. I know you're kind. I know you deserve a life free from men like Walsh. Besides, I added, trying to lighten the mood, you make a damn fine pot of coffee. A small, watery laugh escaped her. That's your proposal? I make good coffee. Well, I said, my thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. You also darn my socks. A man could do worse. She sobered, her gaze intense. Is this real, Jed? This kindness? I keep waiting for the trick, for the price. It's as real as the snow outside, I promised her. So what do you say, Mara? Want to give Garrett Walsh the legal fight of his life? For the third time since I'd met her, she smiled. But this smile was different. It was wide and brilliant, and it reached deep into her eyes, chasing away all the shadows. It was the smile of a woman who was finally, truly, beginning to hope. Yes, she said, her voice firm. Yes, Jed Halverson, I'll marry you. A week later, Marshal Brennan returned. He wasn't alone. He brought a circuit judge, a grizzled old man named Hartwell, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They came with papers, a marriage certificate, legally signed and sealed, and backdated by 3 months. As far as the law was concerned, Mara and I had been married long before she ever fled the Double Bar Ranch. We were, on paper, husband and wife. But as the judge droned on, performing a quick, sterile ceremony right there at my kitchen table, I looked at Mara, and she looked at me, and we both knew it was becoming more than just paper. It was a promise, a partnership, something real and solid being forged in the heart of a storm. We were married, but our honeymoon was going to be a war. The ink on the backdated marriage license was barely dry when the real trouble began. It came in the form of old Tom Buchanan, a trapper who lived on the next ridge over. He thundered into our clearing one afternoon, his horse lathered and his face grim. Jed, he yelled, not even bothering to dismount. Walsh knows. He knows about the marshal and the marriage certificate. How? I asked, stepping out onto the porch, Mara right behind me. He's got spies everywhere, Tom spat. Paid-off telegraph operator in Cedar Ridge, most likely. But that ain't the worst of it. He's not coming at you with lawyers now. He's hired a pack of regulators. Hired guns, Jed. A dozen of them. Word is they're gathering in town right now, planning to ride up here and take his property back by force. My blood ran cold. Regulators. That meant men who killed for money, who operated outside a law that had failed to give Walsh what he wanted. When? Mara asked, her voice steady as a rock. Soon, Tom said, his eyes full of worry. Tomorrow. The next day at the latest. Jed, these ain't ranch hands. These are killers. Maybe you and the missus ought to clear out. Head north for a while till this blows over. We're not running, I said, my hand closing around the handle of my axe. This is our home. Then you'd best get ready for a fight, Tom said gravely. I'll put the word out to the other mountain folk. You stood by us during that hard winter 2 years back. We ain't forgot that, but we're scattered. It'll take time to gather. After Tom left, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. The legal protection we'd built felt like a paper shield against a coming avalanche. We spent the rest of the day preparing. I reinforced the door and shuttered the windows, leaving only small slits to shoot through. I brought in all the firewood and drew buckets of water from the spring until the barrels were overflowing. Mara, meanwhile, was an army of one in the kitchen. She baked bread, cooked all the meat we had, and wrapped it for easy storage. She also laid out all our ammunition on the table, counting every single round. We had my rifle, a shotgun, and my old pistol. It wasn't much against a dozen hired guns. As night fell, we sat at the table, the lamp casting long dancing shadows on the walls. The cabin felt like a fortress, but it also felt like a trap. Are you scared? Mara asked me, her voice soft in the quiet room. I'd be a fool not to be, I admitted. But being scared and giving up are two different things. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was strong, calloused, the hand of a woman who had worked and fought her whole life. When I was standing on that platform in town, she said, I thought my life was over. I truly believed I would die as someone's property. And now I'm here with a husband, a home, something to fight for. A fierce, determined light shone in her eyes. Let him come, Jed. Let them all come. Garrett Walsh is about to find out what happens when you try to take everything from a woman who has nothing left to lose. The attack came just before dawn the next day. A faint gray light was just beginning to touch the eastern peaks when I heard the crunch of hooves on snow. They came quietly, professionally, spreading out to surround the cabin. A voice, slick with arrogance, boomed across the clearing. It was Walsh himself. He hadn't trusted the job to his men alone. "Halverson, I know you're in there. Send out the woman. She is my legal property, and I have come to collect." "Go to hell, Walsh," I yelled back through a firing slit. "This is my wife and my home. You're trespassing." "Wife?" Walsh laughed, a nasty grating sound. "A forged document won't save you. You're harboring a thief. Boys, I want the woman alive. The man is optional." The first shot shattered the window next to my head, showering the floor with glass. The fight was on. The next hour was a blur of noise and smoke and fear. They came at us from all sides. Gunfire splintered the logs of the cabin walls. Bullets whizzed through the firing slits, thudding into the opposite wall. I fired the rifle, taking my time, making each shot count. Beside me, Mara was a pillar of calm fury. She loaded and fired the shotgun with a brutal efficiency, the blasts echoing like thunder in the small room. She moved from window to window, never staying in one place for long, a ghost dealing out death. They tried to rush the door. I shot the first man through the heart. The second one stumbled back, clutching a leg shattered by a blast from Mara's shotgun. They retreated, but I knew they wouldn't give up. Then came the fire. Torches arced through the pre-dawn gloom, landing on the roof. "Come out or burn, Halverson," Walsh screamed. But I had prepared for that. The roof, still damp from the melted snow and coated in a thin layer of ice, hissed and steamed, but it wouldn't catch. Not yet, but we were running out of time, and we were running out of ammunition. I was down to my last handful of rounds for the rifle. Mara had maybe 3 shells left for the shotgun. The firing from outside lessened, and I knew they were regrouping, getting ready for a final, overwhelming rush. This was it. We were going to die here, defending this little cabin on a lonely mountain. "Jed," Mara said, her voice tight. She was crouched beside me, reloading the pistol. "I have to try something." "What is it?" "A bluff," she said, "but it's the only card we have left to play." Before I could stop her, she stood up and yelled through the broken window, her voice ringing with a desperate confidence. "Walsh, listen to me. This isn't just about a contract anymore." There was a pause from outside. "What are you babbling about, witch?" "When I left your ranch, I took more than just a few trinkets," she shouted. "I took your ledger, the real one, the one that shows how you've been cheating the railroad, how you've been selling the same parcels of land to 2 different buyers, the one that proves you've been bribing territorial senators." A dead silence fell over the clearing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I stared at her in astonishment. "You're lying," Walsh finally called back, but the arrogance was gone from his voice. There was a new note in it. Fear. "Am I?" Mara's voice was sharp as a razor. "The records are hidden in a safe place, Walsh. If we die here today, they go straight to Marshal Brennan." "You'll hang. Is my return worth that? Is it worth everything?" I could hear arguing among his men. They were hired guns, not loyal followers. They were paid to fight a mountain man, not to be accomplices in a massive fraud that could get them all thrown in federal prison. "Kill them!" Walsh shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. "Kill them now!" But the attack didn't come. His men were hesitating. He had lost control. And in that moment of hesitation, we heard a new sound. It was the thunder of hooves, dozens of them, coming up the trail fast. For a heart-stopping second, I thought Walsh had brought reinforcements. Then a blood-curdling cry echoed through the trees, a sound that was half human, half wolf. It was Tom Buchanan, and he hadn't come alone. They burst from the trees like an avenging army. Trappers, miners, homesteaders, the quiet, tough men of the mountains. They came with rifles and axes and a righteous fury in their eyes. Walsh's hired guns, caught between the cabin and this new terrifying force, broke. They threw down their weapons and ran, melting back into the forest. It was over in a matter of minutes. In the sudden, shocking silence, Mare and I stumbled out of the cabin into the gray morning light. The snow was trampled and stained with blood. Several of Walsh's men lay dead or wounded. The mountain men were rounding up the others, and then I saw him, Garrett Walsh. He had tried to flee, but Tom's sons had caught him. They dragged him into the center of the clearing and threw him at my feet. His fine clothes were torn and filthy. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked up and saw Mara standing there, tall and proud, the shotgun still smoking in her hands. His face twisted with hate. "Witch!" he spat. "You did this!" "No," Mara said, her voice as cold and clear as a mountain stream. "You did this to yourself. And by the way," she added, a cruel, triumphant smile on her face, "I was bluffing about the ledger. But you didn't know that, did you?" She stepped closer, looking down at the man who had tried to break her. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a paper right here, right now. It will release me from any contract. It will admit the items you claim were stolen were gifts. And most importantly, it will grant full and immediate freedom to my sister Eliza." "I'll never," he began to snarl. I cocked my rifle, the sound echoing in the clearing. "Look around you, Walsh," I said quietly. "You brought war to my home. These men are my witnesses. As far as any court is concerned, I'd be within my rights to shoot you where you stand for trespassing and attempted murder. Now, are you going to sign, or do I save the territory the cost of a trial?" They brought paper and a pen from his saddlebags. With shaking hands under the watchful eyes of 20 grim-faced mountain men, Garrett Walsh signed away his power, his pride, and his last hold over Mara. As they dragged him away, a broken man, Tom Buchanan, clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you we hadn't forgot," he said with a grin. The fight was over. We had won. Mara walked into my arms and I held her tight as the sun finally broke over the mountains, flooding our battered clearing with golden light. We were alive. We were together. And for the first time, we were truly free. The victory felt hollow. We had the paper, signed and witnessed, that guaranteed Eliza's freedom. Tom's sons had personally escorted Walsh to the edge of the territory with a clear warning never to return. They'd put him on a stagecoach heading east and had sent back word that he was gone. But 3 days passed and Eliza did not arrive. No message came, just a deepening, agonizing silence from the Double Bar Ranch. "Something's wrong," Mara said on the 4th morning, her voice tight with a fear that was worse than anything we had faced during the siege. "He did something before he left. I know he did." She was right. That afternoon, one of Tom's boys who'd been scouting near the ranch rode in with news. Walsh had left his foreman, a notoriously cruel man named Curtis Bramwell, in charge. The ranch was on lockdown. No one was allowed in or out. Eliza was still there, a prisoner in everything but name. Walsh, in his final act of spite, had left his most vicious dog to guard his last victim. "He's using her as bait," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "He knew we'd come for her. Bramwell is waiting for us. It's a trap." "I don't care," Mara said, her mismatched eyes blazing with a cold fire. "I am not leaving my sister in that place for one more night." We rode out as the moon rose, just the two of us. Tom had offered to bring his men, to storm the ranch just as they had my cabin, but this wasn't a job for an army. This required stealth. We left our horses in a hidden ravine a mile from the ranch and crept forward on foot, moving through the shadows like ghosts. The Double Bar was lit up like a fortress. Lanterns hung on every building, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter. They were expecting us. Mara led the way, her knowledge of the ranch's layout our only real weapon. She moved with a silent grace that spoke of years spent trying to be invisible. She brought us to a small garden shed at the back of the property, hidden from the main house. "Wait here," she whispered, and before I could argue, she slipped away into the darkness. She returned 10 minutes later with a small, older woman, her face a web of wrinkles and worry. "This is Rosa," Mara whispered. "She was the head cook. She's a friend." Rosa's dark eyes were filled with tears as she looked at Mara. "Senora," she breathed, "they said you were dead. That man, Bramwell, he told the little one, Eliza, that her wicked sister had abandoned her for good. The girl, she weeps all night. He keeps her locked in Mr. Walsh's old study. Mara's hands clenched into fists. How many men are inside the house? 4, Rosa said. Bramwell and 3 others. They play cards in the parlor most of the night. They think you will come charging the front door. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a heavy, ornate key. For the study, she said, pressing it into Mara's hand. I can get you in through the kitchen, but be careful, Senora. Bramwell is a devil. We followed Rosa across the dark yard, our hearts pounding. She led us to the kitchen door, which she had propped open. Inside, we could hear the low murmur of voices and the occasional burst of laughter from the front of the house. Rosa pointed to a narrow set of stairs at the back. Up there, she whispered. 3rd door. May God go with you. Mara and I crept up the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot. The hallway above was dimly lit. We found the study door. Mara's hand trembled as she inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft, oily click. We slipped inside. A small figure was huddled on a cot by the window, her form illuminated by the moonlight. Eliza, Mara breathed. The girl's head shot up. She was a younger, softer version of Mara, with the same strong bones but with wide, frightened brown eyes. Mara, she whispered, disbelief warring with a desperate hope. They said you were dead. I'm here, little bird, Mara said, crossing the room and gathering her sister into a fierce hug. I'm here, and we're getting you out. We can't, Eliza sobbed, clinging to her. Bramwell has men everywhere. He said if you ever came back, he would... Shh, Mara soothed, stroking her hair. This is Jed, my husband. We're taking you home. You just need to be brave for a little while longer. We were almost to the stairs when a voice stopped us cold. Well, well, look what the cat dragged in. Curtis Bramwell stood at the head of the main staircase, a pistol held casually in his hand. He was a lean, wiry man with dead eyes, and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face. Walsh said you'd come, he drawled. Predictable. It's over, Bramwell, I said, my rifle leveled at his chest. Walsh is gone. Let us go. He paid me in advance, Bramwell said with a cold smile. A bonus, he called it, to make sure neither you nor the witch left this ranch alive. Now drop the rifle, mountain man, slowly. I was caught. He had the high ground, and Eliza was between us. If I fired, he could get a shot off at her. My mind raced, searching for an option, any option, and coming up empty. I said, drop it, Bramwell snarled, raising his pistol. And then a shot exploded from the shadows below us. Bramwell staggered. He looked down in confusion at the red blossoms spreading across his chest. He looked past us, down the dark stairwell. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, wreathed in smoke, was Rosa. She held an ancient, heavy pistol in both hands. For 20 years I have watched evil men rule this house, she said, her voice shaking but clear. No more. Bramwell tried to raise his gun, to turn on her, but his strength failed him. He tumbled forward, falling down the long flight of stairs to land in a heap at Rosa's feet. Shouts erupted from the parlor. The card game was over. Go! I yelled, shoving Mara and Eliza toward the servants' stairs. Run! We burst out of the kitchen door and into the night as the ranch erupted behind us. Lanterns flared, men shouted, and guns began to fire wildly into the darkness. We ran for the woods, Eliza stumbling on her bare feet. Mara practically carried her, her strength born of pure desperation. We crashed through the undergrowth, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. We made it to the horses, and I threw Eliza up into the saddle behind Mara. Raya! I shouted, swinging onto Samson's back. And don't look back. We spurred the horses into a gallop, plunging deep into the forest. For hours I led them on a twisting, confusing path through the mountains I knew so well, until finally the sounds of the chase faded into silence. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, we rode into the clearing in front of my cabin. Eliza, wrapped in Mara's coat, was limp with exhaustion and relief. We had done it. She was safe. She was free. We brought her inside and laid her on the bed. Mara fussed over her, washing her face, giving her warm broth, her fierce warrior persona replaced by that of a gentle, loving sister. I thought you'd forgotten me, Eliza whispered, her eyes heavy with sleep. Never, Mara promised, her voice thick with emotion. Never, little bird. Then Eliza's eyes found me, standing in the doorway. "He's really your husband?" she asked. Mara looked across the room at me, her eyes shining with a love and gratitude that took my breath away. "He is," she said softly. "He's the man who saved us both." In that moment, looking at the two sisters, reunited and safe in my home, a feeling I hadn't felt in 6 long years settled over me. It was a feeling of completeness. The long, empty years were finally over. My life, my real life, had just begun. Spring arrived on the mountain like a whispered promise. The heavy snows receded, revealing the rich, dark earth beneath, the air filled with the scent of damp soil and new life. Our small cabin had grown. With the help of Tom Buchanan and his sons, we'd added a new room for Eliza, a place for her to have her own space as she healed. And she was healing. The terrified, withdrawn girl we had rescued from the double bar was slowly being replaced by a bright, gentle young woman. The shadows were leaving her eyes, replaced by a quiet confidence. I'd often find her humming as she worked, a sound of simple contentment that made the cabin feel more like a home than it ever had before. One bright morning, as Mara and I were planting a small vegetable garden, we saw two riders making their way up the trail. My first instinct was still to reach for my rifle, a habit that was dying hard, but I quickly saw it was Marshal Brennan, and with him was a stranger, a man in a city suit carrying a leather satchel. "Morning, folks," Brennan said, dismounting. "This here is Mr. Carlton, a lawyer from Denver. He has some news for you." Mr. Carlton was a precise, serious man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Mrs. Halverson," he began, "I represent a group of investors who were financially ruined by Garrett Walsh, thanks to certain information that came to light regarding his fraudulent business practices. We have been able to sue his estate and recover a significant portion of our losses." He gave Mara a meaningful look. "We have reason to believe you were instrumental in exposing him. Therefore, my clients have authorized me to present you with this token of their gratitude." He handed Mara a thick envelope. She opened it, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Jed," she breathed, "it's a bank draft for $5,000. We were stunned into silence. It was a fortune, more money than I had seen in my entire life. "There's more," Carlton continued. "The Double Bar Ranch has been seized by the creditors. It's being broken up and sold. My clients have instructed me to offer you first choice of any parcel at a deeply discounted price as a further thank you." "We don't want Walsh's land," I said immediately. "Perhaps not," the lawyer said, "but there is one 40-acre parcel on the western edge of the property. It contains the small homes of the Mexican families who work the ranch. They fear they will be evicted by the new owners." Mara's eyes lit up. "Rose's family," she said. She looked at me, a silent question in her eyes. I knew what she was thinking. To use Walsh's ill-gotten gains to secure the homes of the people he had oppressed, it was a perfect, poetic justice. "We'll buy it," I said without a moment's hesitation. After the lawyer left, Brennan lingered. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, staring out at the mountains. "Garrett Walsh is dead. Got himself shot in a card game in Kansas a few weeks back. Seems his brand of bullying didn't play so well without an army of hired guns to back him up." Mara was quiet for a long time. "I thought I would feel happy," she said finally, "or satisfied. But I just feel nothing. He's just gone." "That's how you know you've truly healed," Brennan said wisely, "when your monsters no longer have any power over you." That afternoon, our quiet mountain clearing filled with people. We had sent word to Pastor Williams from Cedar Ridge, and he had come, along with Tom Buchanan's family, Samuel the blacksmith, and dozens of other mountain folk who had become our friends, our community. Eliza, radiant in a dress she had sewn herself, laid out a feast on long tables we had built. We gathered not for a legal proceeding, but for a real wedding, a celebration of a marriage that had been forged in fire and had blossomed into a deep and abiding love. Under the warm spring sun, with the mountains as our witness, Mara and I stood before the pastor and exchanged our vows. Not the sterile legal words from the judge, but promises from the heart. She wore a simple dress with wild mountain flowers woven into her auburn hair. When I looked at her, At her magnificent, scarred, beautiful face, my heart felt so full it might burst. "I do," I said, my voice thick with emotion when the pastor asked. "I did once on paper, and I'll do it 1,000 times more in my heart." "I do," Mara said, her mismatched eyes shining with happy tears when it was her turn, "with everything that I am." The cheer that went up from our friends echoed across the valley. A fiddler struck up a tune, and the clearing became a dance floor. I watched Eliza, my shy sister-in-law, laugh as she was spun around by one of Tom's boys, her face full of a joy I had once feared she would never know again. Later, as the sun set and lanterns were lit, Mara and I slipped away to the edge of the clearing. We stood side by side, looking out at the world we had built together. "The day you found me in Cedar Ridge," she said softly, leaning her head against my shoulder, "I thought it was the end of my life." "It was the beginning of mine," I told her, wrapping my arm around her. "You saved me, Jed Halverson, from more than just Walsh." "We saved each other," I corrected her gently. "I was a ghost, just haunting these mountains. You brought me back to life." She stood on her toes and kissed me, a long, sweet kiss filled with all the promises of the future. A future with a home, a family, and a love as strong and enduring as the mountains around us. If you enjoyed this story of how two broken people found a new life in the Wild West, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what part of Jed and Mara's journey you like the most. Your support helps me keep telling these tales, and I can't wait to share the next one with you. Thanks for listening.